In this video, we introduce the aorist passive indicative and the future passive indicative of the Koine Greek verb system. Last time, with respect to indicative verbs, Greek is a highly inflected language. It's going to change its form based on tense, voice, mood, person, and number. And we've seen this in the last video with different moods in the middle and the passive. And we're dealing just with the passive in this video. So if you remember in the last few weeks, we've talked about how the future has a different passive form from its middle form. So the present tense, for example, shares a middle and passive. The imperfect tense also shares a middle and passive. The perfect tense shares a middle and passive, but the future and the aorist tenses have separate passive forms from the middle. And so what we get now is these different passive forms, the future and the second future passive, the first aorist passive and the second aorist passive. And what we're going to find is the future and the second future and the first aorist and the second aorist, their endings look really, really similar to one another, such that they become really easy to recognize. And with these four last forms here, we now have every single one of the Koine Greek indicative verb forms out there. So starting next week, we're going to do a review of these indicative forms, and we move on to different things. We're going to move on to more nouns specifically starting next week. So if you remember back to the imperfect and the second aorist, we memorized, or you memorized, these secondary active suffixes. And we're going to see that your memorization of those from a while ago that you're going to be asked to recall this week has paid off for you. That memorizing these suffixes pays dividends in the future, because these secondary active endings are not only used for the imperfect active indicative, the aorist active indicative, and the perfect and pluperfect active indicative, they're also going to be used for the aorist passive indicative. And so note the oddity here that all of these three are active, and that these are secondary active suffixes, even though they're going to be on the aorist passive. And something else is going to give us a strong hint to the passive, even though we have secondary active endings here. And what that strong hint is going to be what is called the passive formative. So here we could call it the voice formative, because it tells us what voice it is. It's going to be in the first aorist passive a theta eta, and in the second aorist passive an eta. So what we get is an augment added to the stem, and then we get a theta eta or an eta indicating the passive for us, and then the secondary active suffixes stuck on to that theta eta or that eta. So you can see the suffixes over here. The new is stuck on to the end of the theta eta for thane, the sigma for thais, none for thay, min for thamen, te for thete, and son for theson. And then the same thing over here in the second aorist passive, just without the theta sound. So we have ain, ace, a, amen, ati, ason. And we need to note here that there is no predictable reason that a verb has a second aorist passive. Some verbs simply take a second aorist passive and will use these endings rather than these ones. So that the theta will be absent in some aorist passives and it will be present in others. And it's also important to note that this doesn't line up with whether or not an aorist or a verb uses a second aorist active. So for example, grapho uses a first aorist active, a gropsa. So remember, the first aorist has the sa tense formative in it, and we see that hiding here in the psi. The p has combined with the sigma to make a psa sound. So it uses a first aorist active, but a second aorist passive, a graphane, without the theta here. So all that to say is verbs may have a first aorist active and a second aorist passive. So just because a verb takes a second aorist does not mean a second aorist active, does not mean it's going to take a second aorist passive. And just because a verb takes a first aorist active does not mean it's going to take a first aorist passive. And once again, you're going to find here with the primary, middle, passive suffixes, which we have seen used for these different tenses, the present, middle, and passive, the future middle, the future passive, and the perfect middle and passive. You learned these endings back then, and you're going to find it, this form is the form we're introducing this week. The future passive indicative is, having learned these, is going to help you out for what you're doing this week. Your past memorization is paying dividends for you this week. And so what happens is that those primary, middle, passive suffixes are going to be used in the future passive, the second future passive and the future passive. The future passive is going to have the theta eta, just like the aorist passive. And the second future passive is just going to have the eta, just like the second aorist active. And then we get the sigma added on to the end of this voice formative here. The sigma, remember, signifies for us the future tense. So that the result is that we have thais or ace to indicate the passive with the theta eta or the eta, and the future with the sigma on both of these. And then the connecting vowel, omicron or epsilon, and then the ending. We'll skip over this one, tai, mitha, stay, ntai. And there's changes in the second person singular that should be recognizable to us by now because we've seen this eta with the iota underneath it. And this is a result of the combination of thais with the psi, that the sigma has dropped out, the alpha has gone to an eta, and the iota has gone under the eta. It has subscripted. And so that's why we get these theisi, or theisei in the future passive indicative, and ase in the second future passive indicative. And so what I want to do here is, as we did in the last video, we're going to do a recognition quiz. So I want you to go ahead and pause the lecture, number your whiteboard 1 through 8, and indicate whether in each of these we have a future passive, an aorist passive, and these are the two that we have learned we're introducing in this video, or a present passive, which we've learned previously in the class. So we're mixing in our new material with old course material. So go ahead and pause and write down what we have in each of these cases. All right, so these are the answers we have here. Our first one is going to be a future passive from sozo. So the sigma here, thais, is what tells us we have the future. The next one, a lutheson, is going to be aorist passive from luo. The epsilon at the beginning, our augment, is going to let us know that we are in the past time, that we have an aorist. Next one, a grapho, again, past time, aorist with the augment here. And luamai is going to be a present passive or middle from luo. Remember, the present, middle, and passive forms look identical to one another. A lymphthais, this one might have been a little bit difficult for you because this form looks so weird. It's from lambano. This is a second aorist passive from lambano, but the epsilon here should have let you know that we have an augment, we have past tense, so that we have an aorist. Graphaesontai, we have from grapho with the sigma added, a second future here, but the sigma lets us know that we're in future time. Hetoimaste is going to be an aorist passive. This one might have been a little bit tricky because it's from hetoimadzo, but the epsilon of hetoimadzo has changed. So we have an eta here at the beginning. So this is actually an augment, but it's a different form of an augment, namely the verb lengthening, or the vowel lengthening. And blethesatai is a future passive. So the sigma, again, is our clue that we have a future. And this is a second future from balo. So this is, ble is our changed stem from balo here. So if you got all these right, go ahead and let's high five on 3. 1, 2, 3, boom. And go ahead and try again if you did not, or if you did get all of these right. And this time it should go a little bit faster for you. And remember to look out for the epsilon augment or the long vowel augment, and look out for the sigma of the future. So go ahead and pause number 1 through 8 on your whiteboard. Same things mixed up in a different order here. Identify whether we have future passive, aorist passive, or present passive. All right, I didn't write them all the way out this time because we did that last time. Luomai is our present passive. Graphesantai, sigma there, future. So these, sigma there, future. An epsilon here is an augment for the aorist. Blethes, the sigma there, future. Blethesatai. A lymphthus, an aorist, our augment here with the epsilon. Hetoimaste, again an aorist with the elongated or lengthened epsilon for hetoimadzo. And then agraphe is aorist, again with the augment here. And so now we're going to move from recognition to a little bit more practice, 2 different translation practices here. So as I read, I want you to identify the verb, and then after I read, I'm going to ask you to pause and parse the verb. So we have hoi, mathetai, edidoxthesan, hupa, ton, apostolon, tu, kuriou. So go ahead and see if you can identify the verb and then also parse it. So if you had any trouble with the parsing, here are the paradigms. You can check again on here, check your answer, and correct your parsing information here. So when we look over to our chart, what we're going to have is a first aorist passive indicative. And we see right down here the thesan that matches our thesan up here. Sorry, this is our verb. I should have made that clear earlier. So we have a third person plural. So we're going to be looking for a plural subject for our verb here. And that's going to be our next question. What is our plural subject of the verb edidoxthesan? See if you can identify, identify the subject here. That's right, it is hoi mathetai. The disciples were taught. The action happened to them. They were taught. And so the question is then, who is doing the action of this verb? If edidoxthesan is our passive verb, hoi mathetai is our subject, tell us who is doing the action of the verb. In this case, it is the personal agent, the apostles. Remember, the passive voice, the subject doesn't do the action. The action is done to the subject in the passive voice. And so we have to have something external to the subject indicating who is doing the action. And that can be done by personal agency with hupa plus the genitive, with intermediate agency with the preposition dia plus the genitive, or with the simple dative case following it, which is a sort of impersonal way of showing agency. But in this case, we have personal agency. We translate this by the apostles and the apostles of the Lord. So a genitive phrase here modifying the apostles. So the disciples were taught by the apostles of the Lord. And let's go ahead and do one more here. I'll read aloud and identify the verbs in the sentence, more than one in this case. Phone, akusthe, in te eremo, kai akusthestai, in te ge. So go ahead and if you couldn't identify the verbs, pause here, identify them, and then go ahead and parse them as well. And here is the paradigm to help you out with your parsing information. You can go ahead and pause and match up the verbs with where they fall on the paradigm. So our first one Our first verb is going to be akouste, and our second one is going to be akoustetai. Sorry, that one's a mouthful there. And akouste is going to be a first aorist passive indicative. And this the ending is going to match up with our third person singular. So we're going to be looking for a singular subject. And then our thesetai is going to be the future passive indicative. We have the sigma of the future there. We have no augment here. So we have a future passive indicative. And in this case, a first future, not a second future. If it was a second future, this theta would be gone. And the thesetai is also going to be third person singular. So we're going to be on the lookout for a singular subject to that verb as well. And that is our next question. What is the subject of our two different verbs here? The subject is the same for both of these. It's the nominative feminine singular phone, a voice. So a voice, let's see what our next question is here. A voice was heard in the desert, and it will be heard in the land or in the earth. And so then the next question is going to be why we have eremo. Excuse me, we have a typo there. Eremo, why eremo is in the dative case and why gay is in the dative case. And this has nothing to do with what we've talked about in this video. We're reaching back to past material here. So why do we have these in the dative case? That's right, because they are the object of the preposition in. The preposition in takes its object or the word that comes after it in the dative case. So these prepositions have forced the nouns that follow them to be in the dative case.